I've mentioned the idea of peer academy several times, going back actually almost a decade on YouTube. This video will be a brief summary of what I mean by that and why I think this is the best way to go, not just in terms of a philosophy of education, but in terms of a politics and what we do with our lives. To give a brief pitch for that in the first place, in the next decade, we will see increasing restrictions on our freedom of speech, our freedom of movement, our freedom of association. We will be less and less able to determine our own destinies. Global control of resources and information flows is in the cards. The central planners have assured that this is the trajectory that we're taking. And so, if we want any kind of freedom, we can't simply operate on our own online like we have over the past decade. We have to organize in real-world communities and educational institutions in order to build up a competing philosophical consensus. Part of what gives the elites power is their learning. They are extremely scientific in their methods, and we can't fight a scientific technocracy with gut hunches and intuitions. We have to find ways of cooperating, reaching intersubjective consensus, and the natural way of doing that is within some kind of intellectual framework. We have to arrive at a shared philosophy of life, of the world, in order to find a shared conception of the good and what we ought to do together. To build to that philosophical consensus, we have to synthesize and integrate knowledge from various fields of learning. And so, the kind of cooperative structure that is most natural to this task is a school. Communities designed around this kind of school environment will help us to raise our children and protect them from the kind of poison pills that are present in mainstream academia and media more generally. We have to go our own way. So the basic hierarchy is self-explanatory. There are various subjects inherent to philosophy, inherent to human learning generally. These subjects, we can develop filters to select out the best performing members of each subject and send those members to a common colloquium where people from different disciplines get together and make high-level calls. And then out of that colloquium, we select a single director who has the ultimate decision-making power over certain things. That's the basic sketch of it. The director's power is limited in certain ways. The colloquium's power is limited in certain ways. And there's a lot of flexibility in how the subjects themselves are arranged. So how do you get from a group of people studying a given subject, like math, for example, how do you get from that to one person representing that subject in the colloquium? How do you make that determination of who is the top performer? Well, I think the best way of doing this is to ensure that each member presents their independent work on a regular basis. So say we have a weekly schedule where each week, each member on one day of the week presents their work to their peers. After these presentations are concluded, the various members vote on which presentation was the most productive, was just overall the best. Not voting for yourself, obviously. If more people vote for a given presentation, then the person who made that presentation will be weighted more highly. That goes into a general score that they develop over time, over many weeks of this schedule. If they have a higher score themselves, then their estimation of others in the voting process will be weighed more highly. That means it's not a purely democratic mechanism. The people who are esteemed to be more competent, their voice is taken more seriously in the evaluative process. So there have to be rules governing how the subjects are arranged, and this stuff that I'm spelling out right now would constitute a kind of draft one of the rules of the society. And it is an evolutionary system. It's intended to change and be refined over time. But the basic scheme is there is a basic constitution of the organization as a whole. There are various rules that constitute the laws of that organization. The colloquium votes on the value of the various rules every cycle. The members of the colloquium have their own ratings, and their ratings go to strengthen or subtract from the value of the various rules in existence. If everyone thinks that rule 1 is extremely important, like say that's freedom of speech, or it's some kind of, very general kind of guideline, then each week, each cycle, you would expect that rule to be amplified. This makes it harder to get rid of that rule. The director can remove rules, but they only have so much credit to subtract from the value of these rules. So if you look to the director up here, and then where we go to remove rule, subtract 5 points, if he has 5 points to subtract, he can only, in this chart, eliminate in the course of one cycle rule 4. Otherwise, he could subtract 5 points from the existing value of any of these rules. So the members of the colloquium generally add to the value of these rules. The director can eliminate, and the director can also add a new rule. But this rule added by the director can't conflict with existing rules, and so the colloquium then acts as a check against the director and confirms that there's nothing in violation about the rule that's being added, and they can approve or disapprove of that rule. When there are decisions to be made that aren't covered by existing rules, the director makes the decision. And in a state of exception, in total chaos, when things just go awry, the director would gain kind of dictatorial powers, which is a common feature in many governments. So that's how a constitution is built up over time. And one director who comes in, who's selected out of the colloquium in one cycle, can't just come in and change absolutely everything. If people over time estimate that certain rules are valuable, then those rules are hard to remove. If someone comes in and adds rules and they're not constantly affirmed, then a director can easily remove them. And each member of the colloquium and the director only has a finite amount of credit to use in either adding to the value or subtracting value from a rule. This same process applies to the individual subjects as well. There are rules that apply to the organization as a whole, and there are rules that apply to the individual colleges, you might say, of the academy. So the subject head can be substituted for the director in this chart. The subject house or college can be substituted for colloquium, and the same over here. So besides the rules, there is the question of the abstract philosophy to attempt to reach consensus on. So philosophy as a whole is the broadest conception of human learning. It used to be that all the various subjects of science were included under natural philosophy. So that's what I mean by philosophy, a worldview. We can break it up into various branches. These branches can be composed of multiple subjects. There can be hierarchies of subjects within each branch of philosophy. And there can be more than one college within physics, for example, and these will be arranged hierarchically so that specialists in subdisciplines of physics would send their representatives to kind of subject-specific colloquia within physics. So you'd have people from experimental particle physics, if we ever got that far, and people from, specifically string theory or whatnot. You'd have those representatives going to a higher meta level of the physics department up to the most general kind of worldview level encapsulation of physics, and those are the representatives with that very broad kind of field of responsibility within their subject that go on to the colloquium. So individual subjects we're asking the question, how do we construct this philosophy? Well, a philosophy is a very large set of propositions that aren't mutually incompatible and which seem to accord with experience. So individual subjects, individual colleges, add propositions to their branch of the overall philosophy. These propositions are extracted from the presentations we mentioned before. The weight of the presentation determines the initial weight of the proposition that's being added. Within each subject, each individual, just like they vote on individual presentations, they can vote on individual propositions. They have a certain amount of credit that can go towards strengthening or subtracting from the quantitative value of each of these propositions. If a proposition value goes to 0, it's eliminated. If it goes higher, then it is given more credit when it rubs up against other propositions. It's harder for that dogma, in other words, to be eliminated. Now, these propositions are reviewed by the colloquium or by the higher level of the subject, and the colloquium or that higher level body looks for inconsistencies between the propositions that are on the books. If they find a logical inconsistency, then they present that inconsistency to the subject house, the college in the first place, and the college discusses the perceived inconsistency, and they will vote on what to do. And the value of each proposition is taken into consideration when conducting this weighted vote. The specifics of like the weighting of all of these processes can change, and they would be modified according to the rules that are modified, like I discussed in the previous section. This is just a sketch. So the person with the highest score may be the director, likely will often be the director, but whoever has the highest score is given the opportunity to create a new settlement. The academy as a whole has certain things in common, like the real estate that they're using to conduct all of this activity. So the high score individual is given the choice of going out to found a new settlement or simply staying and acting as leader or as advisor at one of the original settlements. The idea is not to have one community, one physical settlement where all of this takes place, but a network of nearby physical communities. And the organization will raise funds. All of these presentations I mentioned could be posted online, and that could be used to monetize the whole operation at an academic level. And then beyond that, members involved in all of these various branches would likely want to be involved in entrepreneurial activities, and we can help each other get into business as a side project from the school. But within the school, money is raised in collective fundraising ways, like monetizing a YouTube channel or that sort of thing, or having classes, hosting classes online. You monetize in that way, and then when enough funds are raised and the director decides on the establishment of a new settlement, then the high score individual is given the opportunity to lead that new settlement. And they establish the schedule of life at that settlement and the norms however they see fit, as long as they don't violate any of those basic rules outlined in the General Constitution. The distribution of subjects can be the same as the distribution of discrete settlements, or there can be settlements composed of multiple subjects. Individual subjects can be distributed over multiple settlements. That all decides on the decisions made by the settlement leaders and by the rules established by the various subject houses, colleges, and ultimately colloquium. So hopefully that made sense. This is a bare bones sketch. It may not be absolutely perfect at this stage. It's not intended to be. And in the real world, if you have a fewer number of people to start with, you have to begin in some alternative way than what I've sketched out. This is, once you reach a critical mass of people, this becomes possible. But if you think you have some other idea for how we can cooperate, a fairer way to cooperate in the future, and trying, like, how can we survive basically what we're going to see in the next decades, I would like to hear it, because I'm always willing to change my mind on this. Does anyone else have a better plan? I don't see anyone with a better plan out there. So that's what I have for you as far as the concept of peer academy. Let me know what you have to say as far as critiques, comments. You know, it always helps, but remember that specific kind of nitpicking does not actually get us anywhere. And if all you ever do is tear down other projects and you never actually choose to do anything, then ultimately it would be better to go with a slightly erroneous proposal than to go with no proposal and just be a slave of the globalist elite in perpetuity. We have to act. This is my suggestion. So what's yours? Thank you for listening.